Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Accuracy in Academia's June Authors Night, and actually our second one this month, which features speakers that you can't get mostly on campus, usually, and often in front of congressional committees, talking about issues and from perspectives that you might not normally hear, and more importantly, giving you information you might not normally get. My name is Mal Klein. I'm happy to be the executive director of this group, and this meeting and every meeting we have is brought to you by a grant from the Frank A. Fusco and Nellie Goletti Fusco Foundation, which underwrites all of our conservative university lectures. Now, our speaker tonight is kind of the American Association of University Professors ambassador to Accuracy in Academia. Never did I think that we'd develop a relationship on speaking terms with them. Then he came along. And he edits this fine publication, that AAUP puts out, the American Association of University Professors, which you have before you. When he told me the subject of his latest book, I couldn't resist. And so we came up with the topic, Trumping Civil Liberties, ? He wanted to take the question mark off, but I kept it on because I'm more progressive and open-minded than he is. At any rate, we are happy to have him here, and we'll have a nice Q&A session afterwards, so you can question intently anything he tells you. And we're happy to have with us from Chicago, John Wilson.
Thank you, Mal. I really appreciate you having me here because I come at this from a progressive perspective. And so I'm glad, and I hope there are lots of people here who will disagree with me about what I have to say. My book, Trump Unveiled, is not yet finished. I'm still writing it, but it is coming out this fall from Or Books. And I wanted to talk to you today, although there's a lot of things in critiquing Donald Trump that I could talk about. I wanted to talk about civil liberties and focus on his views about civil liberties. And Trump wrote in the opening of a chapter in one of his books, quote, "Your civil liberties mean nothing if you're dead." And that sort of embodies a lot of the spirit, I think, of Trump's approach to civil liberties, that civil liberties is always something secondary to his other priorities. And what I want to talk about is some of his policy positions, some of his history, and perspectives on libel and all of those kinds of things. Now, Trump's son, Eric Trump, also talked about his father and defended his views on civil liberties. I love this quote from Eric Trump, quote, "There is no one who cares about our civil liberties more than he does. This is a guy who jumps up and down every time somebody says holiday tree. No, it's not a holiday tree, guys, it's a Christmas tree." And apart from, I don't want to delve into the entire holiday tree versus Christmas tree debate, except that trying to stop people from talking about holiday trees does not prove you are more concerned about civil liberties than anyone else. And I think it indicates that Trump has a very limited understanding of civil liberties. And Jim Garrity of the National Review has called Trump, quote, "the first anti-constitutional GOP presidential frontrunner," end quote. And that's a view I think that Trump has had for quite a long time. In 1990, he gave an interview where he talked about the Tiananmen Square massacre, and he praised in some ways the Chinese government for putting down that because it showed you the power of strength. And then during a Republican debate, when his old words were brought up to him, he again talked about how the Chinese government was strong and powerful and kept down the riot. And I think there really is a fear that a protest movement, that Trump views a protest movement as something that should be suppressed by the government. And this is not the only idea that Trump has in terms of suppression of the government. Another part of it is the internet. Last year he wrote, quote, "We're losing a lot of people because of the internet, and we have to do something. We have to go see Bill Gates and a lot of different people that really understand what's happening. We have to talk to them maybe in certain areas, closing that internet up in some way. Somebody will say, oh, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. These are foolish people. We have a lot of foolish people. And to me, again, of course, this is sort of what the Chinese government does and authoritarian regimes do. And it's an extraordinary kind of threat to the First Amendment, to have the government saying that we're going to shut down part of the internet, as well as being highly ineffective. You're not going to eliminate terrorism by getting rid of freedom on the internet. Now, another thing I want to talk about is some of the kind of authoritarian approaches that I think Trump has. One of them, he actually made a statement that he would, one of the first things he would do in office is he would sign an executive order stating that anybody killing a police officer would get the death penalty, which is, apparently Trump is unaware that you can't impose the death penalty by executive order, or that the issue of what penalties are issued for the killing of a police officer are state issues. So there are these kind of disturbing aspects that Trump has, as well as in terms of not just civil liberties, but human rights, and advocating for waterboarding and going beyond waterboarding, and even at one point calling for the execution of the families of terrorists. Something that he's sort of backed down on, but has in many ways asserted. And of course, Trump is also famously called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until we figure out what the hell is going on. And I have some skepticism that Donald Trump will ever figure out what the hell is going on. And I worry about that kind of limitation on religious freedom that comes from targeting a particular member of a particular religious group for exclusion from the United States. And Trump actually defended that by comparing it to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. And he said, quote, "What I'm doing is no different than FDR." And I think he's right about that, but I don't think that's the right position. Now, another point on religious freedom, which Trump often presents himself as a conservative for advocating, he's actually had very interesting responses to some of the religious people who have criticized him. When Pope Francis criticized his position on immigration, he responded by saying, quote, "No leader, especially a religious leader, should have the right to question another man's religion or faith," end quote. And that bothers me that he uses a word like right. That, of course, pretty much it's the job of religious leaders to question the religious faith of other people and to talk about what religious faith really means. And he used similar language when Ted Cruz's father, Rafael, made various statements imploring people to vote according to the word of God, which meant vote for his son. And Trump responded, quote, "I think it's a disgrace that he is allowed to do it. I think it's a disgrace that he is allowed to say it." And then, of course, Trump went on to then claim that Rafael Cruz was involved in the assassination of JFK, using as a source a photo in the National Enquirer. And this is actually very common for Trump. I won't go into all the details of how Trump is a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's pretty well established from Obama's birth certificate and onward that Donald Trump is a conspiracy theorist, that he really sees things in terms of conspiracies. And that to me is a particularly alarming possibility to have for a president of the United States, because it's something we've never really experienced before. Not even Richard Nixon, who was a bit paranoid, really was not a conspiracy theorist in the way that Donald Trump is. And the danger of having conspiracy theorists, it's very important in a free society to allow people to be conspiracy theorists. But it's also normally something that's deeply marginalized. The people who are conspiracy theorists don't have power. They're not the ones who control things. They're not the ones in charge of making decisions. And we've never really experienced what happens if you give the leader of the free world all of this power, and he's a conspiracy theorist who thinks people are out to get him, that there are all of these conspiracies going on. So to me, that conspiracy theory approach is an alarming thing. Now, I also want to talk some about Donald Trump and his approach to regulating free speech. And when National Review editor Rich Lowry went on Fox News Channel to talk about Trump and his performance in debate, he said, quote, "Carly cut his balls off with the precision of a surgeon." And Trump angrily tweeted in response to that, "Incompetent Rich Lowry lost it tonight on Fox News. He should not be allowed on TV, and the FCC should fine him," end quote. And apart from the hypocrisy of someone who swears like Donald Trump, objecting to what Rich Lowry had to say, it is, to me, very disturbing that Trump thinks it's the job of the federal government to fine people for mild swearing. And it's particularly disturbing that Trump doesn't understand the fact that FCC regulations only apply to broadcast stations, not to cable networks, and especially not to individuals. The FCC cannot fine an individual for swearing. And what Trump was calling for would actually be unconstitutional under the First Amendment. I do want to just sort of finish up in this sort of very superficial discussion of Trump and civil liberties by talking what I think is the area of civil liberties and the First Amendment that I think he's perhaps the greatest threat to, that he has been the most consistently in the realm of endangering civil liberties for decades now, which is the issue of libel law. And it's a particular interest of mine. At some point I'm going to get back to working on a book about libel law and arguing for the abolition of libel law as a violation of free speech. But Trump goes far beyond even the norms of repression in today's libel law. And in fact, during the campaign, Trump promised to make libel law more severe if he's elected. He said, quote, "We're going to open up these libel laws so when the New York Times writes a hit piece, which is a total disgrace, or when the Washington Post, which is there for other reasons, writes a hit piece, we can sue them and win money instead of having no chance of winning because they're totally protected." And to me, this is a very disturbing idea of taking U.S. law on libel law and weakening it, weakening the First Amendment. And Trump has a very long history of suing people he doesn't like for defamation. In 1984, he sued the Chicago Tribune and its architecture critic for $500 million because the architecture critic called Trump's plan to build a building in Manhattan, quote, "one of the silliest things anyone could inflict on New York or any other city," end quote. And needless to say, Trump has never won any of these libel suits, but he engages in them as a systematic kind of repression that he's trying to do. When the business reporter Robert Slater started writing a book in 2004 about Trump's approach to business, he immediately received a cease and desist order from the Trump Organization Council, demanding that saying that they, quote, "enjoin you from publishing and disseminating the book." And the lawyer for Trump argued that Trump's ideas about business are unique and proprietary to him. And this is really extraordinary, the idea that an unauthorized biography would be illegal because you're stealing someone's ideas by reporting about them. And interestingly, after Jack Welch vouched for Slater, Trump later met with him, and having completely forgotten about his earlier threat to sue him, when he was reminded of it, he explained to them what Trump explained what his thinking was during this. And Trump told him, quote, "Well, he doesn't sound so friendly, so I say, all right, fuck him, let's write a letter and say we're going to sue your ass off if you write false statements." And this to Trump is sort of his preemptive approach, a way of fighting against bad media and bad press. For him is to threaten to sue you. And it's an approach in business to a lot of things. But it's particularly alarming in the First Amendment because of the threat that this poses, to utilize his money and power to just file lawsuits against people. And he particularly does that whenever anyone questions how wealthy he is. Timothy O'Brien wrote a book about him in 2009, mentioning how wealthy Trump thought he was, and then citing 3 unnamed sources who had said that his net worth was between 150 and 250 million. And so Trump filed a $5 billion lawsuit in 2009 because this book asserted that he might not be a billionaire. He also threatened to sue MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell for suggesting he was worth less than $1 billion. He threatened to sue Rosie O'Donnell for saying he'd been bankrupt. This is a common tactic that Trump uses in how he acts. And he uses this as an attempt to intimidate people who are reporting on him. When ABC planned to do a TV movie about him, he said, quote, "I will definitely sue," and then followed up by saying, quote, "As long as it's accurate, I won't be suing them." So a TV movie that he's never even seen before, Trump immediately goes to the idea of let's threaten to sue them so that they'll give me better coverage. He's also threatened to sue Rolling Stone and the Huffington Post, saying that he wanted to, quote, "put them out of business." He even sued or threatened to sue The Onion in 2013 because The Onion published a fake opinion piece, supposedly authored by Donald Trump, that was titled, quote, "When you're feeling low, just remember I'll be dead in about 15 to 20 years." And Trump's lawyers, in response, wrote to him that, quote, "The commentary was not written by Donald Trump. The article is an absolutely disgusting piece that lacks any place in journalism, even in your Onion. I am hereby demanding that you immediately remove this disgraceful piece from your website and apologize to Mr. Trump. I further ask that you contact me immediately to discuss. This commentary goes way beyond defamation, and if it is not removed, I will take all actions to ensure that your actions will not go without consequences." So that was Trump's lawyer responding to these satirical articles in The Onion. And of course, Trump himself, his approach to the press is revoking the credentials of an almost endless stream of publications that he has claimed to have offended him: The Washington Post, Politico, Des Moines Register, New York Times, Daily Beast, Fusion, Univision, BuzzFeed. I don't think any politician in America has banned more individual reporters and media outlets from covering his events than Donald Trump. And while he asserts that he will be presidential when he's president and not go around banning all of these media outlets, I have to say that Donald Trump has promised to become more presidential many times, and he has never yet succeeded. So this is meant to be just a quick overview of where I see Donald Trump is as a threat to civil liberties, that he's someone who has a kind of authoritarian mindset, who sees himself as a CEO who engages in bullying and threats against people strictly as a way of intimidating them, who sees in many ways freedom of speech and civil liberties as an impediment for the kind of policies he wants to implement. And so that's why I think one of many reasons why Donald Trump is an enemy to civil liberties. But I'm happy to have your questions and your responses and your critiques. Yeah.
Well, the first thing, Christine Axman, the first thing, AKA Ikata Girl, the first thing that pops into my mind is everything you've described and much more have been done by the Church of Scientology, who also engages in expensive litigation as a way to punish. The goal is not success. The goal is to create financial hardship just by attacking. I think that certainly your concerns about civil liberties are very well placed. I think what would be interesting is the reaction of other institutions pushing back against a would-be President Trump. What would Congress do at some of these outrageous actions? Like, and doubtless, with a pen in his hand, he's going to attempt to write anti-civil liberties executive orders. I think the real question is, what is the strength of other U.S. institutions in terms of the judiciary and in terms of governors and law enforcement pushing back against what is, because he can't be more presidential because he can't control himself. He's not being anything except the only way he can be. He can't control himself.
Yeah.
So I think that's
Right.
the first
And-
thing that
and-
flashes across my
And
mind.
the question of whether someone else will control him, I'm sure there are a lot of conservatives in this room who will make the critique about how Barack Obama has abused executive orders and the enormous power that presidents have to take executive orders and do a lot of incredibly powerful things. And I think that I disagree partly and agree partly about that applied to Barack Obama. But I think Donald Trump is a really big unknown. There's a giant question mark, not just at the end of this talk, but that everybody has about Donald Trump, which is what would he really do as president? And I think the idea that when you give him a lot more power than he has now, that he would restrain himself, I think the opposite is much more likely, that giving someone like Donald Trump a lot of power it creates an enormous temptation for him to abuse it, whether it's on national security grounds or just on petty personal grounds. Yeah.
What do you think he will do with the media once he's president? Do you think he will continue to try and block people from events? And how do you think he'll treat the media if he becomes president?
Well, I don't think he'll actually ban news outlets from the White House press room. But of course, there are lots of different ways of manipulating the press. As any politician knows, you don't have to just ban people. There are ways of keeping access away from media outlets that are negative towards him. I think the problem for Trump is trying to find a media outlet that likes him, because he's had a contentious relationship with Fox News, and although that's likely to get healed and become much more positive over the coming months, I don't think Trump is going to necessarily have the power to ban the media, and I imagine he's not going to go around threatening lawsuits quite as much. But he is going to sort of take away media access from the media outlets that he doesn't like, and that's to a certain extent true of any president that they do these things. But I think Trump will probably do it much more, and that once he's president, he will try and avoid talking to the media outlets that he thinks have not treated him fairly, whether it's the Washington Post or any of these others.
Go ahead.
I guess my concern is, one of my many concerns about Donald Trump is how he will manage to run anything if he's elected president. He has a history of dropping the ball when things get hot. He's not the guy to stick it, stay with it or stick it through. He's very volatile.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think anyone doubts that he's volatile. I guess the question in terms of management styles that what Trump has, and of course Trump's claim to be president is that he's a great businessman, that he's a great manager of things. And the problem, of course, is that running a business is dramatically different from running the government, being the president. And the kind of deal making you do is very different. And so I think that what Trump brings and sort of his personality flaws are not, in the spotlight of the presidency, I think are likely to be magnified. And one of the things his claims is he can, micromanage everything. That he as a real estate builder, he has this idea that, well, he's going out there, he's personally approving the decorations and all of that, and that kind of hands-on approach, frankly, doesn't work for a president. The federal government is vastly too large to do that. You can't be a micromanager and be president. And it's not clear what Trump is. The other thing Trump has, his claim is that he hires good people and that's how he gets things done. And the problem with that, again, is trying to find the people he can hire on government salaries who will want to work for a Trump administration, considering that there are so many people he's alienated or who have alienated him. I'm not sure he can bring out a talent pool of people to run the federal government like a great corporation. And I don't think that would be a great idea either, but I don't think he can do that. So I think in many ways he tries to rely on the mystique of his name and his celebrity. And nowadays, actually, he doesn't do a lot of real estate construction. He is mostly in the branding business. He sells his name for people to do other projects. And so that's the bulk of how he makes his money. And that's something that really doesn't apply to the problems that the United States faces. You're not going to get rid of the deficit by brand management. You're not going to, sell America's brand overseas and have America hotels and make your money that way. That's not going to work. And so a lot of what expertise Donald Trump claims to have, I don't think that applies well to the job of being president.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
We'll get this landed. You had a question.
Sure. So I appreciate you giving your thoughts and providing your analysis on the topic and your viewpoint. So my question is going to go back to what you mentioned about libel laws and even your advocacy push for the abolition of said libel laws, et cetera. So I guess my question then is, the purpose, I suppose, for a newspaper to come out and say, were to create a false story or false narrative about whether it's the Heritage Foundation or Cato or something, or even a private company. My question then is, in the absence of libel laws, what recourse does that institution have, given the fact that if the New York Times circulates something, it shows up on everybody's phone, it's going to be very difficult for a Heritage's Daily Signal or Cato or even Center for American Progress, right, to combat that narrative. It really takes hold. Anything we've seen with Trump, Little Marco, Lying Ted, these names stick. And it's very hard to combat that even though they're not true. So that's really my question is, what do we do, what does a corporation do in the absence of libel laws to get recourse in the courts when there's no laws or standards for the courts to base their decision upon? So your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, and I guess my response is why should you have recourse? And why is someone entitled not to have lies told about them? I mean, after all, I never signed a contract with Donald Trump promising never to smear him and libel him. So why should he be able to sue me for that? And I think it goes into a larger problem in American society that a lot of conservatives critique about the idea that people have to be kept emotionally safe spaces on college campuses and things like that. I'm going a little far astray here, but the idea that nobody has the right to say mean things about you or bad things or make you feel bad. And the truth is, we should all have that right. And even though it's bad when people make up false things about Donald Trump or anybody else, we're talking about different systems of freedom of speech and regulation. And the question is not whether bad things will happen, like someone libeling and saying bad things about an organization that they have no real ability to fight against. Bad things will happen. They happen even though we have libel. People can write things anonymously on websites and all of that. And it's very hard to hold them accountable even under current libel law. But the idea that the system of libel law that we have is some way of creating great journalism, I don't think it is. I think what creates great journalism, is people having the freedom to say what they wish without fear of somebody going to court and trying to take them down. And of course, Trump is one example of what's wrong with the libel system in that it strongly favors the wealthy and the powerful. People like Trump who have a lot more to lose. I mean, none of us would say that our reputations are worth $5 billion and that someone saying something negative about our income could justify that. Only someone who's a billionaire like Donald Trump could. And only someone who's a billionaire like Donald Trump can just throw thousands and millions of dollars into frivolous lawsuits for the purpose of, trying to suppress people from saying these things. So libel law is not a just system where good always prevails over bad. It's a system generally where money prevails over everything else. And publishers who win libel suits can still go bankrupt because of the cost of fighting a libel suit, even if they win. And so that's what I sort of worry about with Trump, is you have someone who takes his wealth and who has this enormous privilege and money, and who uses it to exact this restriction on free speech to try and intimidate others from speaking. And to me, that's all libel law is. It's a way for rich lawyers to intimidate freedom of speech. And it has not just the theoretical limit on freedom of speech, but a very practical effect on journalism. And it tends to have, I think, many more negative effects than positive ones. And that real journalists like New York Times, they're not going to go and throw away their reputation by randomly libeling people any more than they do now. That kind of approach, that trusting in freedom of speech and trusting in civil liberties as the best possible outcome, even if there may be some terrible things along the way, is I think, what the First Amendment stands for.
But what about all the libel suits lost by Trump's favorite publication, the National Enquirer?
Well, and I mean, that's one of the things that would happen if you get rid of libel laws. You would have more National Enquirers saying even more outrageous things. Now, in some ways, that's beneficial. I would argue that, we know that John Edwards is a scumbag in part because of the hard work of the National Enquirer. Now, we also have the problem of Donald Trump thinking that Ted Cruz's father is an assassination plotter because of the National Enquirer as well. And, that's sort of the danger of free speech, that sometimes people will believe stupid things. And sometimes those stupid things will be false and libelous, and sometimes those stupid things will just be the usual stupid things that people believe. But the point is that the job of the government should not be, and the judges and the judicial system is part of the government. The job of the government should not be to try to bankrupt people because they say things that people think are stupid or that are false. And so that's ultimately the concern I have. But that's from a libertarian perspective, that Trump is definitely not a libertarian. He's someone who believes in big government when Trump is the one who gets to control it. And that's likely to be much more so if he is elected president.
Oh, yeah, sure, I'll ask one. So I have kind of wondered, after seeing some comments that Donald Trump has made, why do you think, I think that if it was someone else, some other person running, they wouldn't be able to say these things.
Right.
Why do you think Donald Trump can kind of just say them without getting punished?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people have expected who came along, the comment about John McCain will crush his candidacy. Well, the comment about this and that are all going to crush his candidacy. And in some cases they would. I'm sure Howard Dean feels like this is such an unjust world where just going, yeah, got him ridiculed beyond belief, and Donald Trump can say almost literally anything, can say he's going to go and shoot somebody and people would still vote for him. He could say anything and he doesn't get harmed. And I think actually part of it has to do with something else I've written about for many years, which is political correctness. That Donald Trump is the candidate of political incorrectness. And one part of that aspect that makes him so appealing is this idea that for a lot of people, well, he's standing up against all of these politically correct people who want to control what you say and control what you think and monitor you and call you a racist and call you a sexist. And so when Trump violates these norms and says things that are incredibly offensive, sometimes even to the people who like him and are going to vote for him, they don't judge him by the way other candidates are judged or a normal candidate is judged. They support him because he's because he's being politically incorrect, because he's saying something offensive. They don't care that he said what he said that's offensive. They care about the fact that he's just willing to be politically incorrect, that he's willing to say something completely outrageous. And they love him for it. And they love to hear, I think Trump fans love to hear him say these outrageous things, even if they don't personally agree with them, even if they would personally find them offensive out of the mouths of anyone else. They see that as not as him saying something racist, sexist, or offensive, but as fighting for a cause, this cause of being politically incorrect. And so I think that's And some conservatives have said, well, this is why the left created Donald Trump, is because they created this political correctness, and the Trump support is really a reaction to political correctness. And so, and I think there is some truth to that Trump is this rebel without a cause, or rebel with a cause of Donald Trump. And people are finding parts of that very appealing. Now, I don't know if he's likely to win, because, you know, it's one thing to support someone to be a rebel when they're in a campaign, when they're coming out and speaking. It's another thing to say, I want that rebellious guy who'll say anything to be the president of the United States. And it's a very different kind of logic. But for the moment, at least, Trump is hanging on to a lot of his support because of that. And that's why Trump really can't start being presidential and being different, because his whole appeal is that he's not presidential, that he's politically incorrect. Yeah.
Speaking of political incorrectness, do you think that when it comes to his vice presidential pick, do you think he's going to pick somebody completely unconventional who is politically incorrect, like maybe say a Mark Cuban or somebody like that, or do you think he would go with a more conventional pick, like somebody in office right now?
You know, again, one of the problems with an unconventional thinker like Donald Trump is he's very hard to predict. That he has said that he's going to go a little more conventional. The problem is that he's sort of running out of conventional people who are willing to associate with him. Even Newt Gingrich, who I wrote a book about 20 years ago, Newt Gingrich, who was clearly trying to be one of his VP, and Trump is interested in him, but on the whole Mexican Indian judge controversy, Gingrich strongly criticized him, and Trump is not someone who takes criticism well. Trump is someone who believes deeply in loyalty, and he sees criticism as a form of disloyalty. And so it's hard for me to see him putting someone in as VP who has been disloyal to him, who has ever criticized him. And that's going to be a very tricky thing for him, to find someone who has some sort of Washington credentials, but who hasn't criticized him. And at some point, Trump can do about faces. He can, I think he could go with somebody like Gingrich. I think Mark Cuban, I think it might be tempting for him, but doubling down on the business executive is generally something that his political advisors are going to tell him is not a good idea. That he needs to have what Dick Cheney was for George W. Bush, a stabilizing force, someone who says this guy is solid, that he's not gonna go all over the place, that there's something predictable about him, that you can understand, that he's not that he's part of the establishment in some way. I think Trump does want something like that, something that can stabilize his campaign, because especially it will depend on how he feels going up to the decision. But right now, I think he sort of feels a little unstable in where he is, and certainly the polls don't look great for him, and he may feel the need to try and do something conventional. But again, it's Donald Trump. He can do whatever he wants.
Go ahead. Quick thought. He could pick someone out of nowhere. Ross Perot picked the oddest person. This Vietnam veteran.
James Strickland? Stockdale, that's it.
And he said, and I didn't understand the significance of what he said when I saw, because I was really young. He said, at the debate, he said, who am I?
What am I doing?
Why am I here? And at the time, of course, I thought, my God, he must have Alzheimer's. But the fact was, he was commenting on the inappropriateness. I mean, on Saturday Night Live, they make these jokes about Chris Christie begging Donald Trump to. But when you said the thing about Washington credentials, I said, well, there goes. What do you think of that idea? What if Donald Trump sees someone, an unknown but a respected unknown?
What, like Sarah Palin? I mean, because when the Sarah Palin thing was done, it was like Oh my God.
What?
Like, what on
Yeah.
earth? It's like YouTube exploded.
I think if you pick Sarah Palin, that would be.
No, but I mean a Sarah Palin-like person.
Well-
Because that's what was done with Sarah Palin.
Yeah.
Pretty much unknown, but she is the governor of a state at a young age. She was attractive and she was a cheerleader type personality. She had she could get people together and cheer and everything and put energy in the campaign.
Yeah,
so I don't see that really
The
happening.
problem is there's not a lot of Sarah Palins out there, whether you think that's good or bad. But and actually, Sarah Palin is an option. That she's somebody who has never burned Trump. He likes her a lot. I think the political class would very much hate that choice, but Trump is not necessarily afraid of that. So, but I mean, Stockdale was a disaster for Ross Perot, fairly or not, in the way he was treated, and so I think trying to go for someone unknown it's pretty tricky. I think Trump wants to get something out of his VP pick. He wants, and it's not going to be someone who's going to give him advice. It's got to be someone who burnishes his image, who can help him out in some way with some group of people. And it's just very hard to identify who someone like that would be, who is acceptable to Trump and who would accept Trump.
But Ross Perot was without gravitas, and I think that's why he likes Stockdale. George H.W. Bush, another bizarre choice. He wanted someone who would attract somebody that wasn't him, and that was a bad. It was a bad decision on that. In that
Yes.
But it's interesting. It perturbs me when you mentioned a Sarah Palin-like person. I thought that woman. What's that woman's name? The one who's is a witch, who's against masturbation, Michelle or somebody.
No,
No,
the other one.
No, Christine O'Donnell.
Yes.
No, and I'm not being frivolous, like this is a ballroom talk. I know this is a very serious thing, we're asking questions. But do you think that he could reach out and find someone who was an unknown? And the thing with Dick Cheney was, I don't think Dick Cheney had I guess he was governor once, so I guess he did in fact have political experience.
Well, he was a senator for a long time.
Yeah, so
he
you
had Congressman.
Wyoming,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right.
Actually, he was head of the commission that was defined a VP choice.
Right.
That's
When
right.
the commission picked.
Right.
What do you know? It's me.
But yeah, the picking an unknown is really a dangerous thing, and because it usually backfires on you. It's very hard to do it right, and I think Donald Trump he wants someone who has a name, and he's not afraid of being overshadowed by anyone. Certainly not Donald Trump is. And so Chris Christie is a possible option. That would be sort of in his mind a kind of safe choice if the indictments don't come down in a bad way on Christie's people. So there are those options, but really, this campaign is all about Donald Trump, and the vice president is not going to have a dramatic impact. It can make Donald Trump look more ridiculous, more out of place, more like he doesn't know what he's doing, but it's going to be very hard, even for a good VP pick, to do anything to help him. So that's sort of the thing. That's why I think he's going to pick someone who can stabilize him. And frankly, I think he's going to pick someone who he thinks will help him govern, which is what Cheney in many ways was. Pick someone who will help him govern in January, because Donald Trump, believes he's going to win. And so if he doesn't think there's anyone he can pick to help him politically in terms of winning, he's going to pick the person he thinks who can help him get his agenda through Congress and help him in the presidency.
I got a really boring question about the whole
Sure.
libel thing.
Mm-hmm.
The American system, you have to prove it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
But the British system, you only have to prove harm, whether true or untrue. Has he ever expressed any sympathy for that system?
I don't know if he's gotten to that level of detail. He said he wants libel laws to be weakened. Whether that means weakened down to the level of the UK system, which is of course famous for libel tourism. In fact, there have been American laws now to stop libel tourism in the UK from applying to the US, where basically some rich sultan in the Middle East flies to to London to file a lawsuit against somebody who's printed something they don't like, and using the UK as the place to go to have these kind of libel exchanges. But what Donald Trump would do in the American system, I think what he's calling for, there's a split in the American system thanks to New York Times v. Sullivan, the 1963 case, between regular people for whom there is a lower level of libel, and public figures for which there is a higher standard you have to meet of actual malice, disregard for the facts. So it still has to be untrue. Even in the UK system, they've done some reforms, I think, at this point where it has to be untrue. But what Trump wants, I think, is to eliminate New York Times v. Sullivan and make the libel standard the same for everyone, so that there's not a higher standard that public figures have to meet. And of course, Trump has been a public figure forever, so he's well accustomed to the standard, which is pretty strong, and I think he knows in all of these cases he has no hope of winning, and that he's doing it just to annoy the people who annoy him. And so he really does want to make libel law much easier for people like him, public figures, to win.